We had this come up a couple of times since May. I went back and I tracked this theme and conversation to see just exactly when it started popping off, and it was in May it was sometime around May 15th or so that I had brought it up, an alternative theory behind what schizophrenia is. And that was just, it might have been just like a Reddit post or something from somewhere. And that triggered a long line of conversation. I think one night it was actually with the boys of Nephilim Death Squad. We brought it up, and that's when they referenced Jerry Marzinsky, reminding me that I had seen one of those first viral interviews that Jerry had done on the topic of psychotic voices, and what their true origin is. Is it something that's generated from within or from without? And what the implications of that is. He has a very unique perspective on this. I don't expect everybody to agree with it, but that's not the whole point at all. So have nice, vibrant conversations in the chat room, and hopefully we can take your calls and get your reactions on the other end of things. But there's so much to do with him tonight. I can't wait to jump into it all. Really can't. I also am going to give away an ounce of silver tonight. So if you're out there and you send in a super chat on quitefranklysuperchat.com, on YouTube, the Rumble Rants, or the Pilled, the gold pills, I'm going to be putting your name into the name picker. And Tony from quitefrankly.gold, who many of you have signed up as even just small Wolfpack members, that is every month, even if it's just $20 a month, you get an allotment of physical gold or silver. Well, if it's gold at $20 a month, it's probably just gold backs, something a little bit smaller. But silver is close to like $40 an ounce right now. So, you throw a $5 super chat in there tonight, you might be able to quadruple your money, or whatever the hell that is. 5 into 40, 8 times. 8 times. That's a pretty good grand prize. Anyway, wherever the hell you are, that's what's on the table tonight. I also have just one more thing to say. Tomorrow night, though I will not be live because it's a summer Friday, just a Friday off. On Rumble, we are going to be airing the rerun from last week's Saturday night show that many of you have not seen. So not only have we been sharing the link to the Pilled rerun all week, but on Rumble tomorrow night at 7 o'clock, you get on over there and you'll be able to enjoy what we all did live together last week. And then next week on the 23rd, you have a chance to be there for another round of live Saturday fun, which will then be used to fill in the gap on another Friday night that we have off coming up after that. And that's how we're going to balance things out, to regain a little bit of sanity and have some fun at the same time. That is going to be premiered tomorrow at 7 o'clock. Although I'll have a full day of work here at the studio tomorrow. Maybe I'll document it on Instagram a little bit, because that's becoming a very vibrant place for all things, quite frankly. And I'm really excited about that. And yeah, that's that. All right. Hey, you see this real quick before we go to our... Oh, wait, no. I have a birthday. Listen to this. Our friend Amber from Canada, she's got a boy. His name is Logan. And Logan just turned 13 years old just 2 weeks back. It's a little bit of a belated birthday, but 13 is a big, big year. You've become a teenager. So I wanted to wish a very special and belated happy birthday to our man, Logan, son of Amber. 13 years old. They've been watching together since 2017. Imagine that. Poor kid. But he must have very thick skin. Head and shoulders above the rest. So there you go. Those Frankly babies, ain't nothing going to phase them. Don't read the chat room, whatever you do. Okay, that's all I got for you right now. On the other end of the intro, we're going to lay out the red carpet for Jerry Marzinsky. We will be right back. Don't you go anywhere at all.
you let one ant stand up to us, then they all might stand up. Those puny little ants outnumber us 100 to 1. And if they ever figure that out, there goes our way of life. It's not about food. It's about keeping those ants in line. That's why we're going back. Does anybody else want to stay? Let's rock!
It's almost that time of year. We are at the midway point of August. That means it is, as of tomorrow, as of Saturday, it'll be more so September than it will be August. Oh no. Anyway, it's going to be a good one tonight. I really can't wait for it. And here is something I want to just throw out there real quick before we get into Jerry's story. Because, it's just weird, and we're going to see a lot more of it. I've been reading, every day, more and more people writing about how they want to leave a girlfriend, a boyfriend, or a spouse because of a relationship they've struck up with a AI that they think is real or something like that. You want to talk about mental illness and people who are really struggling. Well, a little bit more than that. Getting a step further than that, listen to this one. World's first, this is from Oddity Central. I like going to this website every once in a while. World's first humanoid pregnancy robot sparks controversy in China. It's controversy in China. Imagine what it would spark elsewhere. The world's first pregnancy robot sparks controversy in China. Reports about the world's first ever humanoid surrogate robot nearing completion at a robotics company in China have sparked controversy about the potential ethical implications of such a device. On August 8th, Chinese science and technology media outlet KZ published an interview with Zhang Qifeng, a PhD at Nanyang Technological University in Singapore and the CEO of Kaiwa Technology, a robotics startup working on a revolutionary pregnancy robot. In it, Qifeng revealed that his company was very close to completing the world's first humanoid pregnancy robot, featuring an advanced incubation pod integrated within the robot's abdominal module. Why? Listen, again, why? We knew that they were getting toward mechanized reproductive methods just based on what breakthroughs has been announced in the last however many years, just the last 5 to 7 years, with the artificial wombs, like the latex sacs. They're doing it right now. They're doing it for lamb fetuses and all that stuff. There's also we were talking about the human bodies that were being grown that were, I don't know, just spare parts garden. Then there is the whole womb transplant stuff that where that's all going over there. But the idea that an incubator would be made possible for a fertilized egg to be able to be grown and, I don't know, nourished in some kind of a way so that it reaches full development, at least in a technical sense, not in a natural sense, of course. But the whole idea that this was going to be put inside of a robot instead of just a regular incubator, it's as science fiction weird as it gets, no matter what. But to think about this, at the heart of the surrogate robot lies an artificial womb where the implanted embryo is nurtured in amniotic fluid and supplied with nutrients through a tube connected to the umbilical cord. Qifeng claims that the artificial uterus had already shown great success in animal testing. Oh, we know. And that the humanoid robot is expected to be released within a year for a price of less than $100,000. See? Now anybody can get in on it. The artificial womb technology is already in a mature stage, and now it needs to be implanted in the robot's abdomen so that a real person, and the robot can interact to achieve pregnancy. A real what? So that wait. A real person. They're building these robots so somebody can mount it and bust a nut inside of it and get the robot pregnant. This is instant. I did not expect that, although I guess I should have. It needs to be implanted in the robot's abdomen so that a real person and the robot can interact to achieve pregnancy. Is that what they're calling it now? Interact. You want to interact to achieve pregnancy tonight, honey? Allowing the fetus to grow inside. Although Dr. Zhang did not provide specific information on how the eggs and the sperm are fertilized and implanted in the artificial womb, his interview quickly went viral on Chinese social media, sparking heated debate among online users. Critics dubbed the technology unnatural, adding that it was cruel and unethical to deprive the fetus of a connection with its natural mother. Yes, this is all common sense. Common sense stuff. But of course, when we're talking about technology like this and whether you should or could, those classic answers, those questions with answers that we got from Jurassic Park back in 1992, it just doesn't matter. This is why I was talking about the other night with the time machine. The time machine paradox. Now, again, if time is linear, then I think we have proof right now that time is not linear, is what I should say. Because if time was linear, then we would have already been destroyed. Unless time travel is never possible. Of course, there's that. But we know right now, if time is linear, that nobody invented a time machine. Because if it was possible, somebody was going to do it, despite all the reasons not to, and eventually, for all the reasons why you wouldn't, the entire universe would be destroyed by some paradox created by somebody screwing up and going back in time and changing the wrong thing or whatever the hell else, whatever kind of Back to the Future scenario you can come up with. There's a reason for it. There's no reason to explore technology like this. There's no ethical, moral reason to explore technology like this. None. Incubators are wonderful things. Wonderful things. And because of that technology, we have seen children who have been born premature by months, who in other eras would never have had a chance, be given more than a great chance at surviving and thriving. So it's not about the incubation technology. This is something totally different. I know you understand. And that's where we are. So I just wanted to bring it up because it's a little bit of a spooky thing. What the hell is this? What the heck? No, I don't even know that. I don't even know where this stuff comes from. This is why I think everybody thinks the internet is dead. Because we let too much of the world in on it. I think that could be a bigger part of it than we all think. But, it goes hand in hand with what we're talking about tonight because we are really discussing things that are spiritual in nature. And we are really not, we're not going down the right path. Not with this. Unless somebody stops it. I think most people would say stop this immediately. But it's not happening. It's not happening. And if there's no public support for it, then that just means that the experimentation is going to be moved underground. Unfortunately, I think that's really what we're looking at here. Okay, so I'm waiting for Jerry. I was hoping he was going to be here about six minutes ago. That's not working, not yet. And also we are not on Rumble. So that's just the way it's going to be tonight. All right. Well, other than that, there was another one I wanted to talk about, but I'd rather really just wait it out until Jerry comes on. We have his book that I was able to source a good amount of information from in a digital sense. An amazing journey into the psychotic mind, breaking the spell of the ivory tower. Now, what all that means, hopefully we will be able to get an explanation. I was talking with him earlier on today, and I'm pretty sure that he should be here. But he is a retired licensed psychotherapist, Jerry is, with over 35 years of experience, working with and studying the thought processes and the voices, the origin of the voices heard by psychotic and criminally insane patients in some of the most volatile psychiatric institutions in the nation. Okay? This is what is going to really add a little bit of spookiness to this because, mental health, that's something that really affects everybody. People have issues all over the place. But when you talk about the institutions that Jerry Marzinski has worked in and the types of people he has come in contact with, we're talking about some of the more volatile and dangerous ones on the face of the earth. And he was awarded the state of Arizona's Meritorious Service Award while working in the psychology department of a large state prison. He was also awarded the Pima College's Apple Award for teaching of abnormal psychology. Jerry has held the position of second lieutenant in the Arizona Civil Air Patrol and is a licensed commercial pilot, a certified scuba diver, and a long-distance motorcycle rider. He has also served as assistant scoutmaster. His formal academic training comprises of a BA in psychology from Temple University, that's right down in Pennsylvania next to us, a master's degree in counseling from the University of Georgia, and 2 years of study in a PhD psychology program. He's the author of an amazing journey into the psychotic mind, breaking the spell of the ivory tower that we just put on the screen right now. And I'm so happy to have Jerry Marzinski joining us tonight. How are you, sir? Oh, sorry there. How are you, Jerry? You there?
Hey, well, I got you up twice here, and I was watching you speak, and I had pushed the wrong link.
Okay.
So now I got two of you up here.
Well, can you hear me? Do you hear me once, or you're hearing me in double?
I'm hearing you in both. Yeah. Can you hear me?
I hear you. Yeah, you sound fine, and I don't hear anything in the background.
Well, I've got you on two videos here.
Okay. Are you listening to
Let me see if I can get off one of these.
Yeah, if you're watching the YouTube, just click the YouTube off.
I'm hearing you in double.
Okay.
Okay, I'm gonna leave and come back in.
You got it, Jerry.
I'm gonna leave and come back in.
Okay. It's a Thursday in August. It's gonna be good. If we can get past the call, it's gonna be fantastic. So, how you guys doing? Everything's well? Good. That's what I hear. A little humid outside, a little muggy, but otherwise all is well. Did you have your keto brains this morning? Did you put your Verso in your evening being in your water last night? How was that? I've been on the BPC 157 for about 2 weeks now. I think I'm doing pretty good. Then again, I don't have any really chronic issues, so I'm trying to find out where the hell that's going to affect me elsewhere. What else can I throw at you? Well, we did laundry today. Well, seems like Lauren did laundry today. I helped her carry up this big Santa sack of clothes up the last flights of steps. So that was nice. Lila knifed Lauren last night for no reason. It was like a prison shanking. I got home. Lauren was upstairs. She came down after a little while. I was just sitting there having a Topo Chico. And Lauren came down and said, hey. I said, hey, what's going on? And then all of a sudden, she got attacked by Lila. Lila grabbed onto her ankle with two hands. I heard Lauren curse. She very rarely curses. And I looked at the cat. I said, what the hell's wrong with you? Are you just getting old? You have to get the hell out of here? Lauren was like, no, I love you, Lila, but that was not right. Blood. And then today, Aurora. Aurora's just great today. I don't know what to say about Aurora. Aurora's fantastic. I'm waiting for Jerry to come back. No need to do anything else. Anyhow, let me look in the chat room, see what you guys are doing. Okay, let's see here. Let's see. Puff Puff Pass says just someone. Yes, go ahead. Smoke him if you got him. Smoke him if you got him. John Volts is talking about how his wife got him the entire collection of Mad. Mad TV? Mad? Oh, from the 1950s. No, that's not. From the 1950s to the 2000s? Oh, are you talking about Mad Magazine? Anyway, no cat scratch fever. Hopefully not. Oh, yeah, listen, Lila's been a nice cat. Not nearly as nice as Pyretta. And she's got some health issues. She doesn't live at the studio anymore. She's with Anthony because she needs advanced care. But we'll talk about that later. Jerry's back. Here we go. Thank you. Jerry, do you hear me now?
Yeah, I got you just once now, so I had to. Oh no! Now I got two pictures.
What do you mean? No, listen. You look fine over here. What everybody else sees is you and me side by side, and you look great. You sound great. Are you hearing doubled audio? Is that going to be bad for you?
I'm not hearing double the audio. I'm just seeing myself twice.
Okay, well, if you can, ignore yourself because we look great on the output end, and everybody's going to enjoy it. I promise. Okay. Well, welcome to the show. I've been waiting a while to talk with you, and the topic that we have. This is one that has popped up a few times this year from a theoretical standpoint, but you're the first person who can speak to the subject with any kind of authority. So here's what I want to open up because we know about your background already. Take as much time as you like. Let the audience know the series of events that led you to believe that schizophrenia in particular is not what it is said to be to the public.
Well, that took place over years.
Yes.
Because I was in denial of it. Even 20 years after I started working with schizophrenics, I was still in denial that these voices were entities. Okay. So, when I started off, I was at Temple University and I was majoring in psych. And I hit abnormal psychology, and it was like I was just fascinated. I was like, well, what's causing these people to be insane? What's causing this stuff? But it didn't say anything. The abnormal psych book didn't say anything about what was causing it. All it was a series of detailed descriptions of these mental illnesses. And it just kind of grabbed me. And I was like, what is going on with these people? And that was the first thing in college that kind of grabbed my attention. Now, going into this, what I didn't like about psychology, and this is all over the U.S. at least, is you can't get access to a clinical population almost at all. I mean, if you said, hey, I want to go into a mental health center, I want to go into a state hospital or state psychiatric hospital or a private psychiatric hospital, I want to speak to schizophrenics and I want to study them, you won't be let in. They will make some kind of excuse. You won't be let in.
Is that across the board? I mean, that's hard for someone like me to believe, of course, because I'm not petitioning anybody for access to patients with a certain condition there. But are those denials based on what kind of studies you want to perform, or is it that you don't have access to any? I have to imagine that somebody would want these people to have some sort of relief if there's somebody with genuine desire to help them. No?
There is no genuine desire to help them. None of those psychiatric medications that they're dishing out to these people cure anything. They merely treat symptoms. They pound down symptoms. and they're making billions of dollars treating symptoms over and over and over again. So the antidepressant market in the US is expected to hit $15.98 billion by 2023. That's billion with a B. It's not million, it's billion. The global antipsychotic sales is expected to hit 14.54 billion in 2021 and hit 15.5 billion by 2022.
And we hit those marks?
Oh, you're past those marks. Right. These people are making a fortune on selling toxic drugs that don't cure anything. And it took a while to catch up with that, because after I graduated from graduate school, I believed, just like everybody else, that schizophrenia was caused by a chemical imbalance in the brain, and that psychiatry knew what they were doing, and that they had the answers. Okay?
Yes.
So back to not trusting. I mean, the way I was raised, I didn't trust authority. I was raised not to trust authority from my upbringing. So that was one factor that played into this. I didn't like the fact that I could not verify anything that these professors were teaching me in psychology, other than abnormal psychology, where you could go into a rat lab and you could run these schedules that they said would result in these certain behaviors, and you could actually watch them appear. That wasn't so with virtually anything else. You had to take their word for what they were teaching you was the truth.
Okay, so I have a question about something you just said about the chemical imbalance thing, because of course, I guess another thing that we should just talk about is what is the publicly stated reasoning for anything. I mean, we hear a lot about chemical imbalances in the brain for one thing or another, whether it be attention deficit disorder or schizophrenia or whatever. What chemicals are said to be out of balance? Because I mean, that's the first question. What chemicals are said to be out of balance?
Well, let me answer that with this. They don't even know what the chemical balance of the brain should be, let alone what's out of balance. I spotted this, probably the first few years. After I got out of graduate school, I went to work for one of the biggest psychiatric hospitals on the planet. There were like 10,000 patients there when I got there. It was the size of a small town. There were 200 buildings. It was huge. It was in central Georgia. It was called Central State Hospital. It's been shut down now, but it was massive. Okay. And here I come on. Nothing in college or graduate school had prepared me for what I was going to find there. One of the first things that I noticed was that going into psychiatrist's offices with my patients, you would think that if there was a chemical imbalance, they would have to find some kind of baseline. What is the baseline of the chemical balance in order to treat what chemicals were out of balance?
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
That wasn't happening. You go in there, the patient would tell the psychiatrist what they were feeling, what they were thinking, the psychiatrist, okay, we'll start with this medication right off the bat. There was no test. There was no baseline. There was no blood work. There was no EEG, EKG. There was no kind of objective test at all. It was like a guessing contest. They would start off with whatever drug that they thought would work, and then they'd try that and bring the guy back in another couple of weeks and like, okay, you're still hearing voices. If they're still hearing voices, they'd increase it. Or they'd add another one. Or they take one off and replace it with another. It was all playing with drugs. These drugs didn't cure anything. They didn't get rid of the voices. What they were major tranquilizers, really. They dumbed these people down. They turned them into zombies.
Yeah, you would think that that this would be most repeatable the most repeatable test across all cases, if there was a baseline, like you said, to find whether there's a deficiency somewhere or a surplus somewhere else. And but when you started putting all that together, that there wasn't any chemical proof or data that was being shown to you, but all of the treatments were the same, and you started getting a little bit more, you said, over time, when you were talking with your patients and you were learning from them, these fact patterns started to arise. What were sort of some of the things, the first things that you were noticing that made you start thinking that these voices that they were hearing were not internally generated, but they are coming from outside of them, an outside influence in some respect?
That took years, because I was studying them. The first thing that went out was the trust for psychiatry, and the medical system. So I didn't know this previous, but this chemical imbalance theory, it came from a drug company who was intent on selling Prozac, and that was Eli Lilly. So here's a statement from a psychiatrist, basically. It says, it was not until the late 1980s, after the release of the landmark antidepressant Prozac, that the idea of a chemical imbalance hit the psychiatric mainstream. As the psychiatrist Peter Brigham, 1991, points out in his book Toxic Psychiatry, the drug company Eli Lilly advanced the chemical imbalance theory as a marketing scheme to sell their new drug Prozac. There was, of course, no demonstrable evidence showing that depressed patients had any imbalance whatsoever, but Lilly ran with it. Before long, psychiatrists and psychiatric patients alike came to identify with the idea that mental disorders are caused by a chemical imbalance in the brain. So it started off with a lie, and it's still a lie, and they're still pushing it. They're still teaching this, even though it's been disproven over and over. They're still pushing it in the universities. It's still in the textbooks. It's still in the advertisements. Okay? So it was duplistic to start with. And even before that, the medical system had been taken over by the Rockefellers. Now, I didn't know this when I got out of graduate school either. So what happened is that the Rockefellers and the Carnegie Foundation, they wanted all medical schools to teach pharmacological medicine. That means all their teachings are based around drugs, pharmakia. Right? So in 1910, the Carnegie Foundation and the Rockefeller Group sponsored the infamous Flexner Report, which shut down any medical school teaching subjects outside of mainstream pharmacology. That's like, you either teach drugs as the cure for everything, or you don't graduate any students. They paid off Congress to do this, right? Mm-hmm. To pass this law. The edict was so powerful that only a few medical schools survived, such as Johns Hopkins and McGill, and a handful of others connected with these groups. They were the only schools that could legally license doctors who practiced any method beside pharmacology. They were threatened with loss of their license if they did anything else. So if they wanted to practice naturopathy or Tesla's approaches with the violet ray or natural, they couldn't do it. They would lose their license. Right?
You right. So
this was a deep state takeover of the medical system in the U.S.
I have you over here. I have a couple of quotes that you've published, because when you bring up pharmakia and the Rockefellers and the state of allopathic medication and that whole way of treating people for any ailment. We could be talking about the common cold. We can be talking about anything that doesn't have to do with the hearing of voices in the head, where there are some kind of psychotic breaks that are in there. But in this particular situation, whether it's cancer or even it's a far different story in your situation when you're talking with the criminally insane in these institutions, because we are talking about a malady that is not even of this world, what you start realizing. So it's one thing to say, okay, well, people are sick. they have, they have cancer, they have some other kind of infection, what's going on. And yeah, these drugs, they'll treat symptoms. They're going to keep them alive for a while longer, but they're not going to cure them. And it's a big money making boondoggle. But this right here, what you're starting to stumble upon and realize over time is that it's a much bigger story, because we're talking about something not of this world. Here's what you write. You said there are a number of powerful forces blocking your coming to this conclusion on your own. The first is that we are taught from childhood that all thoughts that appear in our mind belong to us. If you are hearing them, who else could they belong to? Akin to a radio receiver, your brain is a physical receiver of non-physical thought, like a radio is a receiver of non-physical radio waves. If you tore a radio apart, you would never find the person who is speaking through it, which I think is pretty profound. So when you put it that way, it's very clear why such a secular profession would reject this kind of consideration out of hand, because we're dealing, now at that point, you're leading to a place where most psychologists and psychiatrists insist doesn't even exist.
Right. They won't go there. This is a spiritual, energetic malady. It's not a physical malady. It's not something like an infection that you can give an antibiotic for, and the infection will go away. Even though they douse these people with tons of these psychiatric drugs and turn them into zombies, those voices still do not go away for the most part, very seldom. And if they do, then they come back as soon as they stop taking these medications. Not to say these things aren't necessary in many cases. Working with the criminally insane, there's some of those people that were so whacked out, so dangerous, that the only way you could control them is with these psychiatric drugs. You had to tranquilize them. You had to turn them into zombies. Otherwise, they were so dangerous. But for the average person, what psychiatry is telling these people over and over and over again is that your brain is broken. You've got a chemical imbalance in your brain. It's not fixable. The only thing you can do is take these toxic psychiatric drugs for the rest of your life. It's a very hopeless diagnosis. It's like that gate where it says any who enter here give up all hope. And these guys believe it themselves, because that's what they were programmed to believe in medical school.
So what were the biggest things here, though? You say it took over years to really form your thoughts and your convictions on what the issue is and how it needs to be confronted. What were the first, dare I say, paranormal, supernatural events that you said, okay, well, this is not a toxic thought pattern that a person can manifest these kinds of results outside of themselves? Because, what you're describing is a situation where a person is acting as a spiritual conduit. So when did you become completely firm in your beliefs that this is what it is?
Probably 25 years after I started working in this field. I did not want to believe it. For years, I believed it was a chemical imbalance. And then when I saw that it wasn't, when I saw that there was no baseline, that there was no tests, and that psychiatry was just giving those drugs, dishing them out based on what the drug companies were telling them. So that's like letting the fox in the hen house. And then, they disproved this chemical imbalance thing over and over and over again. So it was lie after lie, misconception after misconception of psychiatry and psychology also. The second big misconception was the DSM, this listing of all these psychiatric disorders. They're all made up. There's not a single objective test for any of those, 297 right now in the DSM-5 psychiatric disorders. They make them up. They're all made up. There's not a verifiable test for any of them. So first it was breaking free of all the brainwashing that I underwent in undergraduate and graduate school. You know, okay, this isn't true. This biochemical imbalance thing isn't true. The DSM, these are all made up diagnoses. And then at the state hospital, I was working for the Department of Vocational Rehabilitation. So what we were trying to do was find the highest functioning patients in that hospital, train them up in a vocational skill, and then get them out of there. Okay. And for the most part, probably the highest functioning of the bunch were the schizophrenics. Okay. But they wouldn't stay on their medications. And for good reason. I mean, those medications were horrible. They had all kinds of terrible side effects. And I was wondering, I mean, this brings me back to the first time I noticed this other anomaly. At this hospital, the psychiatric unit I was working on was 3 floors high. So I noticed on the second floor, there was a banister, and it was like a pipe that ran down to the first floor. The cap was off of the top of that banister. It was just a hollow pipe. And I found, well, that's odd. I noticed it, but didn't think anything of it. And then one day I was walking down doing my rounds on the first floor. And here was a maintenance man cutting the top off of the banister on the bottom. So on the first floor, he was cutting the cap off of that banister. And here was sparks flying all over the place, smoke all over the place. And it was like a little 4th of July. So I stopped with all the patients who'd stopped there, and I was standing there with them watching the fireworks. And then when that cap fell off, it was like a waterfall of psychiatric drugs came pouring out of that banister. There were thousands of multicolored pills that just kept pouring out of there like Niagara Falls. These patients had been dumping these psychiatric drugs into that banister for decades.
Jeez.
And there were thousands of them in there now. So I stooped down and I looked at all these different pills, and it looked to me like a majority of them were antipsychotic drugs. So I'm like, each one of these is a vote for a schizophrenic patient to stay crazy. Why are they doing that? Back in the 70s, the only treatment they had for schizophrenia was these drugs, right? And that's what we were taught in school. That's what we were taught on the front lines. It was all drugs. It was all run by psychiatry. They were like the captains of this stuff. And then I found out that my patients, they would not stay on these drugs. I mean, it was like, what was odd is as they were about to graduate, they would do something to screw up, so, there was one girl that she was about ready to graduate from cosmetology class, and she went off her drugs and went nuts. That was the 3rd time. Okay. So if they went off their meds 3 times, we would discharge them because that was the only treatment we had. And we tell them, you can't stay on these drugs, then you can't stay sane.
Well, let me jump in there, because you just said that the one girl, if the third, she was in cosmetology school, and she came off the drugs and went nuts. What's the explanation for that? Especially if the drugs have no purpose in helping somebody regulate and keep themselves in proper orbit to keep themselves on track, and I don't know. So what do you attribute her going nuts to?
That was exactly my question. And it's not just her. How come they all were going off of those medications? Eventually they all went off. I don't remember one that didn't go off at some point. Now the side effects of those medications are awful. I mean, that's true. They're just awful. But going psychotic, from what I saw, was even worse. So I'm going, okay, let me run a little experiment here and see what's going on. I don't understand this. Why are they voluntarily going off of their meds and then going crazy? Do they want to be crazy? I mean, what's going on with this? So what I did is I got everyone that went off their meds after they were put back on their meds and they leveled out again. I'd call in my office and I'd ask them, I'd say, why did you go off your meds? Right? And the common reason was, well, the side effects are awful. Right? I already knew that. What I did is I went to the DSM and I pulled up all the symptoms of paranoid schizophrenia. Hearing voices, seeing monsters, having nightmares, feeling paranoid, people are chasing you, people talking in your head, just voices threatening you. It's just a hell on earth. And in my opinion, from what I saw, it's much worse than the side effects of these psychiatric drugs. So I would list all those in like a check sheet. And then I'd bring these people in and I'd ask them, I'd say, okay, you went off your drugs. You told me that you went off because of the side effects of those drugs, which are horrible. I said, write down all the side effects you experienced on the drug you were taking. And they'd write down a handful of side effects that they didn't like. Dry mouth, blurred vision, feeling like a zombie, kind of shuffling. They're bad. They're really bad. And then I'd give them this check sheet of all the symptoms of paranoid schizophrenia, the audiovisual hallucinations, all the symptoms. They check each one of these that you experienced when you were off your drugs and you went psychotic. So they check out a bunch of those, and then I'd hand them both sheets back, and I'd ask them, which one is worse, the side effects of the drugs or being psychotic? Every single one of them said going psychotic was worse than the drugs, the side effects of the drugs. And then I'd ask them, well, then why do you go off your drugs? And their answer was, I don't know. I don't know for 3 freaking years. I don't know. Right? So I would ask every single one of them that went off their drugs, and I got the same answer all the time. I don't know.
So at this point, are you starting to surmise that once you start coming onto the trail that this is a spiritual malady, that there might be other intelligences involved here, that it was those intelligences that didn't want to be suppressed?
Yes. And that happened 7 years in, where that became close. After working at that hospital for 7 years and I started seeing these patterns that these voices ran. They were running fixed, repeatable patterns. So here's psychiatry insisting that these things are auditory hallucinations. But here I am seeing pattern after pattern after pattern appearing, right? And if they're running patterns, they can't be hallucinations. Hallucinations are random. They're all over the place. They don't run patterns. You can't predict what a hallucination is going to do. Right? So 7 years in, this came clear as to what was going on here. Now, the other thing I saw that I couldn't figure out. So here I am gathering all these pieces of this puzzle. It's just giant puzzle, and I hate puzzles. I don't like doing puzzles. But here's all these pieces of the puzzle that didn't make sense. And one piece was that of all the staff at that giant psychiatric hospital, the one staff person who was being assaulted above all the rest were psychiatrists. They were being assaulted by schizophrenics at a rate, equal to that of attendant staff that were on these psych wards 24 hours a day. It wasn't psych nurses who were being assaulted. It wasn't psychologists who were being assaulted. It wasn't doctors who were being assaulted. It wasn't counselors. It wasn't, workmen. It was psychiatrists. And I'm like going, these psychiatrists at the state hospital would only see these patients for 20, 25 minutes a month. How are you doing? How's your meds working? And if they made any complaints, they'd jack up the meds. So most of the patients lied to them and said, oh, I'm doing fine. The voices are quiet or they're gone. they didn't want to tell them because they knew that if they told them they were still hearing the voices and the voices were still bothering them, they would put them on more drugs and turn them more into a zombie than they already were. Right?
Okay, so let me ask you something here. The patients themselves now. What you're describing is a situation where a person is acting, as I said before, as a spiritual conduit. But are these patients that you are dealing with over the years just more psychically and spiritually talented and sensitive than other people? Was it a specific thing, trauma point in their life that made them susceptible to some kind of a spiritual attack? Because, we're all spiritual beings. I just wonder if there's anything about the patients that connected them all together, if they were more open, or if it was trauma, if trauma was a big part of everybody's past.
Yeah, there's a one-to-one correlation between horrendous physical, psychological, and sexual trauma. Virtually all of them were traumatized badly in one way or another. Now, when I left the state hospital and went to work for the psychology department of the state prison, I found that there was a large number of prisoners who had been using amphetamine, and that amphetamine opened them up, and they became psychotic through the use of that drug. The prisoners called amphetamine the devil's drug. So they would start out, they'd start using the meth, they'd feel like Superman. They had a lot of energy, it made them feel good, they liked taking the drug. And then they started hallucinating, hearing these voices, while they were high. And they went, oh, well, that's just a hallucination, it'll go away when I come down. And it did for the most part. And they might have heard those voices 10, 15, 20, 50 times. And they went away when they came down. And then one day they didn't. And they were just as psychotic as any of the schizophrenics in the psych ward. So there's something about meth that opens these people up to these negative forces.
So then would you say this is 100% of the cases of schizophrenia? Is there any room where there is something that is not spiritually driven? Because also I'm sure that there are schizophrenics out there that didn't have a traumatic past. So how does this all shake out?
Well, there's others that don't have a traumatic past, but were playing with Ouija boards.
Oh.
And here they are playing with Ouija boards. They're talking to some spirit on the Ouija board, and they're doing that for a while. And then all of a sudden they start hearing this spirit in their heads, and it doesn't go away. I talked to one gal that she was just doing a pendulum, and the voices came into her head. And Ouija boards are dangerous. I've talked to a lot of patients over the years that were playing with Ouija boards, and the voices moved from the Ouija board into their minds.
We were talking about this, the alternate theories to I don't know if this is the only condition where this is the rule, because it seems like so many things can go wrong with the human body and the human mind, but I think part of the theorizing that we were doing is whether or not this, in some respect, explains some of the prophets or the oracles of the ancient past. And secondly, if this is a situation where a person, yes, you're talking, what you're discussing right here is and I want to hear some examples of this too, because I'm sure you've seen a lot of things that the average exorcist has seen, but. Secondly, if this is a situation where a person is being attacked by spiritual malcontent, then is there any instances that you know of where a person is opened up and they're actually receiving benevolent interactions? Like they're hearing guardian angels, they're hearing the voice of God himself. What kind of experience you have with that on the other side?
Well, for the most part, the positive ones speak more in feelings and intuition than they do words. I spent the last 10 years where I was working for somebody else, working psych crisis in the major hospitals around Tucson. Those people who it's like there's people that I met, patients I met in the emergency room who had attempted suicide, and there was no way they should have survived it. No way. I mean, but it happened. There was one lady that she lost her husband. Her son was causing her a lot of problems. She lost her job. She was about to get kicked out of her apartment. Credit card bills were all mounted up. Everything was going wrong with her. And so she went, okay, I'm done. I'm going to kill myself. She didn't want to cut herself because she didn't want to maim herself. So what she did is she decided, well, I'm going to go out to the train track at a small town, south of here, and wait for the train to come by. And then I'm going to drive in front of the train. And that's what she did. She sat there. She called her sister in San Diego. She was telling her sister goodbye, and the train was coming. And as the train got closer, she drove right in the front of that train, stopped in the middle of the track, and that train plowed into her, blew the horn, plowed into her, picked up that car and threw it into a second train track. And then a second train came by and hit that car again and threw it like 50 yards off of the railroad track. And here it was, this mashed, crushed piece of metal like a squashed Coke can. And she was trapped in that car. She could not get out. It was just crumpled metal. They had to come with the jaws of life and cut her out of there. And here she was 2 hours later, sitting in front of me in the emergency room with only a black eye. And I'm like, I read the report, and it was like hit by two trains, having to be cut out of her car, and all she's got is a black eye. And I asked her, I said, what happened? What were you thinking when you came to and you're in this car and you're still alive? And she said, I was furious. She said, I was absolutely furious. I did not want to be alive. She said, I was angry. And she said, I was cursing God and I didn't want to be alive. And she said she heard a voice tell her everything's going to be just fine. And she just felt this feeling come over her, a very peaceful feeling. And that was it. She was no longer suicidal after that. And, I talked to her. I ran, the psych evaluations on her. And I didn't think she was suicidal after that. So I wrote my recommendation that I thought she should be left out, that she'd learned her lesson. I'd never thought psychiatry was going to go for that. I thought I thought they would turn it down and they would admit her. But no, they let her out. So it's feeling and intuition. And above that, there was one guy, voices told him to go out, get his pistol. He had a 6-shooter, get his pistol, get in his car, drive out into the desert when he ran out of gas to go shoot himself in the head. So he did that. He ran out of gas. He took his gun. He walked out in the desert, sat down on a rock, cocked it, and was about to put it to his head when he said this strange bird came up and started screaming at him, just screaming at him. He said he lived in the desert all his life and he'd never seen a bird like that before. So he said he took the gun and he fired a shot at the bird. And when the gun went off, it like woke him up. It was almost like he was hypnotized, and he looked at the gun and he went, what was I going to do? So here's this hypnotic state that these voices put people under, and they do these horrible things. And then they get into court and they go, I don't remember doing that. I didn't do that. I don't remember doing it. It's the voices that are driving them to do these things. And of course they go, well, it's the voices. And the judge just goes, well, you're nuts. We're locking you and your voices up.
It makes you wonder how much of a spiritually ritual method the CIA developed with MK Ultra. When you think about the kinds of stories we've gotten, even like with the RFK assassination, and people like Sirhan, who to this day have no recollection of where they were and what was happening. That I wasn't me that pulled the trigger. That there's always just almost like blackout moments there. And
Yeah, I think it's a very similar process.
yeah, yeah. Then again, there's the question of what the origin is. When we talk about MK Ultra, we have a situation where a person kind of disassociates and loses control of themselves, and they're programmed to serve a specific function by a bunch of people. Maybe there's drugs involved, but there is a method that takes place in a safe house somewhere, and they get tuned up. What you're talking about is something that could happen and has happened to just everyday ordinary people who haven't been black bagged and taken away by a government agent or something like that. So this is when I start thinking about so many of the Exorcist interviews that I have listened to over the years, whether it be Michael Magano or, Father Ripperger or Malachi Martin. And when I think about spiritual torment and possession versus mental illness, the most obvious standouts are stories of, how do you tell the difference between the two? And you're always looking for those supernatural examples, supernatural knowledge, unnatural strength, speaking in foreign languages, levitation in some cases. Are there any stories of personal confrontations you can tell us about that really made you feel like you were in the presence of something that was not only unnatural, but so far beyond your earthly power?
Oh yeah, there's plenty of those. As I was finding these patterns, okay, so one after another, I started asking these people, schizophrenics, about what the voices were telling them. So what was so odd is here's this huge psychiatric hospital with many hundreds of staff and 200 buildings, and not one of them is interested in what these voices are telling these patients. So here's these patients listening to the voices, and when they start listening to the voices, they get in trouble. So there's a one-to-one correlation between them listening to the voices all the time and them getting in trouble. And what are these voices saying? It was like nobody was interested in it. So I started asking these patients, what are these voices telling you? They didn't want to talk about it. There is no benefit to them talking about it. I mean, look what happens to them. They start hearing these voices. They think something's wrong. They tell their parents. Their parents drag them off to a psychiatrist. The psychiatrist says your brain is broken. They fill you with these toxic drugs. And every time that they complain about them, they take them back to the psychiatrist. They give them more drugs until they turn them into zombies. Their friends leave. They go, well, you're possessed. You're weird. I don't want to hang around you anymore. And on top of that, the voices themselves are telling these people, if you tell anybody about us, they're going to think you're nuts and they're going to lock you up. I didn't find that out until later either. But the voices don't want them talking to anybody about them, the voices themselves, or what they're saying. But they started running patterns. And the first pattern I noticed was that they were consistently negative. It's the most common consistent trait. They're consistently negative, derogatory, insulting, abusive, and destructive. They don't say anything positive. It's always stuff like you're no good, you're rotten, you're stupid, you're worthless, you're ugly, nobody likes you. It's always negative stuff. So my question is what holds them on such a negative trajectory? Why aren't they random like regular hallucinations? Why are they consistently negative? What holds them on that path? How come they're not all over the place? How come they're not sometimes negative, sometimes positive, sometimes neutral, and everything in between? Why are they consistently negative? That was one of the first questions that popped into my mind. I'm like, what is that? So that was the first thing I saw. So that flew in the face of what psychiatry was saying as far as these things being hallucinations. Hallucinations don't run patterns. They're all over the place. They're unpredictable. These voices are predictable. The second trait that I saw was they were anti-religious. They didn't want the person going to church. They didn't want them reading the Bible. They didn't want them speaking to preachers. Um, they didn't want them praying. The first time I noticed that was that the chaplain at the psychiatric rehab center where I was working, he would hold these kind of ice cream socials for the patients, once a month or something like that. And I noticed that none of the schizophrenics would ever go to those ice cream socials, where they would dance and they would have ice cream and cake and, just kind of have a little party down there. They wouldn't go. So the first time I saw that, I thought, that's odd. The second time I saw it, it was like the same guys, they wouldn't go. The third time I started asking them questions. How come you're not down there? Well, there is no God, they'd say. I prayed to him a bunch of times and I never got any help. And, I don't like church and it's all a bunch of crap. And I noticed on their nightstands here were all these negative books they were reading, murder mysteries and war stories and all negative stuff. And I was like, well, that's odd. So here was another pattern. And what I did is I started asking the schizophrenics on my caseload. I asked them, what would happen if you went to church with the voices? And it seemed like it depended on how strong those voices were. If the voices were weak, they would usually shut up in church. Okay? If they were moderate, they would get louder and they'd start mocking the preacher and say stuff like, Jesus couldn't even save himself. What makes you think he's going to save you? They'd start making fun of the preacher. They'd start getting louder so the patient couldn't hear what the preacher was saying. They'd make him uncomfortable. They'd make him where he couldn't concentrate on what the preacher was talking about. And if the voices were very strong, they would just drive them out of the church. They would get up and they would run out of the church. Right? So here was another pattern that was showing up. Why would a hallucination be anti-religious?
Mm.
So
was there any in particular, I don't know if you've gotten as far as even just specific chapters and verses. Was there anything particular about the Bible, any message, any prayer that they hated more than others?
Yes, they absolutely hated the 23rd Psalm. They couldn't stand it. I had one patient tell me that when he repeated the 23rd Psalm, his voices reacted to that like worms thrown on a hot frying pan.
Jeez.
They can't stand it. They can't stand Psalm 91 either. So why would a hallucination be anti-religious? And these are repeatable patterns. This doesn't just happen once or twice. Those of you who are out there working with schizophrenics or have schizophrenic relatives, go to my website at jerrymarzinsky.com, then go to articles, and there's a list of these patterns there. You will see them for yourself. Bottom line is, if these voices are running patterns, they can't be hallucinations like the psychiatric mafia insists they are. Well, and what I pay, I spend 8 years in higher education, 4 in undergraduate, 2 in graduate school, and 2 in a PhD program. They knew nothing about the voices. All those programs were so spiritually dry. They were like the Sahara Desert. We're spiritual beings. I mean, your spirit leaves you, you're dead.
Yeah.
You're a spiritual, energetic being. Your thoughts are energy, your memories energy, your spirit is energy, your memories energy, your feelings are energy. All this is energy. And what is psychiatry doing? They dump drugs on your brain.
We have a mutual friends, and they told me a story, although I don't remember anything about it. That you had an experience. They said if you ever talk to Jerry Marzinski, tell him to tell you the story about the prisoner who was zombified, and that there was some kind of an electrical anomaly that happened with him. This is something like this I would love to hear about, because again, here is an example of, if I have a cold, if I have some kind of a condition, if I am depressed or if I am psychotic, if I'm suffering from delusions, psychosis of some sort, I don't know where we go from there to being able to affect the physical reality around me. So when we start getting into these experiences that kind of start asking supernatural and paranormal questions, that's where I really believe that we're removing all doubt that at least a good portion of these cases are being misdiagnosed, which has been said time and time again for as long as I've been studying the phenomena of exorcism. That so many people who are in there in psychiatrist's office should actually be talking to a priest somewhere or something. But there's those worlds are so far apart from each other.
They're so far apart, and there's nothing spiritual about psychology or psychiatry. Nothing.
Okay,
nothing. It's like I said, it's dry as the Sahara Desert.
So tell us about this electrical story. Then I have more questions.
Okay, so what happened is as these patterns started mounting, so you had negativity, anti-religious. They foster and create negative emotion. They feed off of that negative emotion. They drain their victims of that negative emotion. They get louder after sunset. They get louder when ignored. They foster self-destructive behavior. They foster isolation. They demand the attention. And this goes on. There's 23 such patterns. Okay, all of them repeatable. So I started wondering after I left the psychiatric hospital, I took a job at the Arizona State Prison System. But what I learned there to start with at the state hospital, when I started asking these patients questions about their voices, one of them got upset, or should I say his voices got upset, and had him go talk to a psychiatrist and said, hey, this guy's asking me all these questions about the voices, and I don't like it. He's upsetting me. The next morning, I ended up in the psychiatrist's office on the red carpet being told by the psychiatrist that these voices are hallucinations, that that's all they are. And don't be asking questions about them, because what you're doing is upsetting these patients, and you're just reinforcing these hallucinations, and you're making the patient worse. Right? And he threatened me. He said, you keep doing this, and we're going to take corrective action against you. Right? So that happened kind of twice while I was at the state hospital. So I had to hide from the psychiatrist. When I started asking these guys questions after that, I had to keep them to very few questions and make sure I didn't upset these guys, because psychiatry didn't want you looking into it. They didn't want you investigating the voices. I'm like, they don't want to even look there. But you can't say anything that's the most of these psychiatrists are just, there's some good ones, but I'd say the majority of them are so freaking arrogant. You can't talk to them. You can't disagree with them about anything. They're the boss. So I started wondering what would happen if I started interfering with these patterns. Now, once I got to work at the state prison, I didn't have to worry about one of the patients going to one of the wardens and going, hey, this psych is asking me all these questions about the voices and I don't like it. They get out of my face, go play in the traffic. That wouldn't even hit the area for any concern. I mean, it would be like, you get out of here with that, So what I did is I got groups of prisoners who were schizophrenics. They were hearing voices, and they agreed to tell me in real time what those voices were telling them, okay, while we were in session. So I had like a window into their psychosis. I could see what was going on in their minds. I could hear what they were telling me. I could watch their reactions. It was like just having a window into the psychotic process. And I would speak with the voices, and they didn't like what I was doing. They didn't like what I was saying. And they spoke in full, coherent sentences. It wasn't like word salad. So back in undergraduate school, when they say, oh yeah, the voices are hallucinations, I thought, well, they're like word salad. They're just, babbling. It's nothing coherent. that's not what it was. I noticed that in the state hospital, that the patients would be carrying on these full-fledged conversations with their voices. It was like listening to somebody on a telephone where you could hear what they're saying, but you couldn't hear what the other guy on the other end of the line was saying.
Mm-hmm.
So these were full-blown conversations that they were having with their voices. They would argue with them. They would discuss things with them. There was one lady who was arguing with her voices that she didn't want to leave the hospital grounds, and the voices were telling her to leave the hospital grounds. So as she's walking off the grounds, she's arguing with her voices, telling them she didn't want to leave the hospital grounds. So they weren't what I thought. They weren't word salad. These things were coherent. They spoke in full sentences, and they were giving these patients messages. And those messages were consistently negative. You're stupid, you're ugly, you're rotten, nobody likes you, nobody believes you, you're worthless. They were consistently negative, rotten messages. So they were running these patterns, and I went, what happens if I started interfering with these patterns? So I started giving these guys in the group homework and said, go do this and come back next week and tell me how it worked. So I had, between 10 and maybe 15 of them all the time that I was working with, because not all of them would want to talk about the voices. There was just a specific group of them on the unit. And a lot of them were just as curious about what the voices were and how they operated as I was. Right? So when I started giving them this homework that would interfere with the voices, one by one, they started coming back and saying, the voices don't like this homework. They don't like you. They don't like us coming here. They're screaming all the way here. They didn't want us coming here. And one by one, they were all saying, the voices don't like what you're doing. Right? And they didn't know each other because we never met as a group. I saw them individually. And there were like, I don't know, 500-600 people on that unit. They didn't know each other for the most part. So here the voices are complaining that I was interfering with what the voices were doing. Right? The next thing, as some of them are starting to get better, the voices are coming less and less often. They're not as loud. Then one of them stops in the doorway after I finished talking to him. He turns around in my office doorway, and he said, he looked at me in the eye and he said, you know what you're doing is dangerous, don't you? And I never thought about that. I went, they're in your head. They're not in my head. They can't come out of there. I'm thinking this to myself. I didn't say that to him. I just looked at him. I didn't say anything. And he turned around and he walked away. And I'm like, well, that's interesting. Where did that come from? And what's going on there? I didn't forget about it. I kind of stored it in my mental gunny sack back there with all the other pieces of the puzzle that didn't fit. And so the next thing that happened is one of the guys came. He got into the medical unit somehow. I didn't give him a pass, but he got in there. He knocked on my door, opened the door, and he says, the voices want to talk to you. And I said, they want to talk to me personally? And he goes, yeah, they want to talk to you personally. That had never happened before. In almost 20 years previous, that had never happened. I had never spoken to them directly until afterward here. It was always through the patient. The patient would tell me, well, the voices are saying this, and they're saying this about you. And I'd tell them, well, you go tell the voices to go stick their head in the toilet. You can't believe anything they say. They're consummate liars. It went like that. It was always through the patient was the interpreter, never directly. And so I asked them into the office. And by then, my denial system was shattered. It wasn't broken, but it was shattered. There was so much evidence that these things were entities and not hallucinations, but I still didn't want to believe it. So I asked this guy, I said, well, okay, sit down. And I said, what do the voices have to say? And these words came out of his mouth. You have no right to interfere with our way of life, plural. And it just went boom. I went, they are entities. It was that moment when it dawned on me. And I looked at this guy and he goes, that wasn't me that said it. That was them. It wasn't me. I didn't say that. And, wouldn't have been good for him if he was playing with my head. that wouldn't have worked out well for him. But, he was honest about it. And I said, well, okay, tell them this. And I forgot what it was. But he said, I don't have to tell them anything. They can hear you. They can see you, irrespective of what I say. And I'd never thought about that before because I thought they were seeing through his eyes and they were listening through his ears. And I wasn't sure what was happening after that. But he was talking whether independent of me, they can see you independent of me. They can hear you independently of me. And I'm like, whoa. And that's where my denial system finally crashed. I mean, it just crashed. It just fell apart. And I'm thinking they are entities. This isn't some hallucination. This isn't something wrong in their subconscious mind. These are entities.
And then from there, I mean, this is a confrontation point here. You're meeting each other. They are disturbed enough to want to make direct contact and let you know, okay, it's almost like generals meeting on the battlefield before something goes down to state the terms. But there was an escalation of force after that.
Yes, there was. So, this was the shot across my bow. It was a warning, knock it off. They didn't want me messing with them. They didn't want me understanding or studying them, And, one of the things I was more so in the past than I am now was an adrenaline junkie. If I wasn't an adrenaline junkie, I think I would have backed off of this stuff a long time ago. But, you get something like that talking to you from another dimension, and that gets the adrenaline kicking. So, what I was reading was a book from a South American shaman, Miguel Ruiz. It was called The Voice of Knowledge. And he was talking about entities that were very similar to these voices. And he was talking about how they sucked the energy out of these people. And I noticed that these voices did the same thing. There was a one-to-one correlation between the voices attacking these people and their energy level leaving and going down to nothing. And I would ask them, I'd say, are you aware that once the voices come, that your energy level drops to nothing? They weren't aware of that until I mentioned it. And then once I mentioned it, they go, oh, yeah, now that you mention it, yeah, there is. They disappeared. My energy disappears. And I said, well, you didn't use it. You were laying in bed all night tossing and turning. And one of them told me that they were as exhausted after they got out of bed in the morning after being attacked by the voices all night that they felt like they were digging with a pickaxe in the hot sun all day. Now they would, once I brought that up, a lot of them recognized, yeah, I do feel, powerless after the voices leave. I don't have any energy, but they didn't realize that until I brought it up. Okay. And then I would ask them, well, where did that energy go? You didn't use it. You were laying in your bed all night. How could that get you as exhausted as, digging ditches in the hot sun all day, and they went, well, I don't know. I'd ask them, where'd your energy go? I don't know. And it was, I don't know. All of them, none of them. I talked to scores of them. None of them knew. Some of them realized that their energy was being taken from them. But psychosis feels so bad that among all the bad feelings, they didn't seem to recognize that their energy was being drained from them. You know, they were paranoid. They were hearing voices. They were feeling bad. They were feeling sick. They were feeling drained. They were confused. I mean, they had all this stuff going on. They didn't notice that their energy was being drained. Mhm. So on the ones that did, I would ask them, well, where'd it go? They'd say, I don't know. And I'd say, okay, if you stuck your hand in a fire 5,000 times and each time you got burned, what's burning you? They didn't have any problem saying, well, the fire burned me. And then I'd say, well, you've been listening to these voices for decades. They've come much, much more often than 5,000 times. And each time they came, you were drained. Where did your energy go? They'd say, I don't know. They were being blocked from seeing that these things were parasitic entities. And the voices didn't want them to know that. And I didn't know how badly the voices didn't want them to know that until I started doing psych crisis work in the emergency rooms. Because in the emergency room, the administration did not want you working with patients there. They wanted you getting them out of the emergency room. That's it. They didn't want you counseling with them or doing anything with them. And I was thinking, what do these patients need to, the bottom things that they need to know if they're ever going to recover from this disorder? One would be that the voices are separate from who they are. You know, the voices would tell these people, we are you. When the prisoners would ask the voices, who are you? What are you? The voices would say, we are you. They wanted them to believe that the voice they heard in their head was them. It wasn't separate from them. It was them. Now, if they can get the patient to believe that, then they have control of the patient. Right? But then the patient is making no separation between themselves and these voices that are commanding them to do rotten stuff.
And so so bring us to the day, because I have a few more places I want to bring this to you before we end the broadcast tonight. Bring us to the day that this escalation of force came to a new level, where there was a kinetic representation of something that wasn't just your patient in the room with you.
Well, that happened a few weeks after the first thing where I was told, you have no right to interfere with our way of life. So I think it was the same patient that I brought in weeks later. And I had this book from Miguel Ruiz talking about how these things sucked energy. Right? And I would be asking schizophrenics, I would be hammering them with questions all the time. I'd be asking them everything. I mean, everything I could think of, I'd ask them. And for the most part, they were pretty cooperative, the group that I dealt with. So I started reading this paragraph, and I told this guy, I said, I'd like your opinion on what this shaman says about the voices sucking energy. Okay. So I got to that part where he was talking about the voices or these entities sucking energy. And I read it, and I looked up at this guy and I said, well, what do you think? I looked at him, and he was just staring at me like a zombie. He didn't say a word. It was like he was hypnotized and just staring at me. And I'm like, this is weird. This is weird. I'm like, he's going to attack. I just had this gut feel that he was going to attack. So I pushed my chair against the back wall and braced it, so if he jumped me, I could at least kick him back and I wouldn't be knocked over in the chair. And then while I was looking at him, all of a sudden behind my head erupted this loud crackling, and it sounded just like a welder, like an electrical welding torch. It's just crackling real loud, like crack, crack, crack. It's just like you were listening to somebody welding, And I'm like, what the hell's that? And I look over, and it's moving from behind my head to the wall off to the right. I don't see anything. And I turn around and look at him, and he's still staring at me with this zombie look on his face. And I ask him, I said, do you hear that? And he says nothing. He's just staring at me, just like, just this weird look. And
you feel an electrical presence in the room, but but you just hear the crack, almost like ball lightning, but you can't see it.
I can't see it. It's loud. It's moving at a 45-degree angle up the right-hand wall of my office toward the ceiling, and it's just crack, 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 crack. I don't see anything. I don't smell anything. I don't feel anything. Um, it's just crackling. So I'm having to keep my eye on him because I'm still expecting him to attack. And looking at the wall to see if I could see anything there, I couldn't see anything. So it gets up to the ceiling and it starts crackling across the back of the office up at the corner, and it goes over his head. So I could see him and hear where this crackling is coming from at the same time. And I don't see anything. And then it starts coming down the left-hand wall closer to where I'm sitting. And I'm going, okay, what's going to happen when it gets here? And it's coming right for me. And then it jumps into this Rubbermaid trash can right near my leg. And I bend over and I look in that trash can, and there's nothing there. Nothing. It's just crackling. Something's crackling in that trash can, 3 feet from my face, and I see nothing. And then just like all of a sudden, boom, just like that, it stops. It just goes silent. And I'm stunned. And I look up at this prisoner, like expecting him to say something. And he just stands up very slowly and he goes, I gotta leave. I'm like, yeah, get out of here. Get the hell out of here. Go, go, go. So it's like I was relieved when he left. And then I get up and I start examining the walls. There's no crackle marks. There's no burn marks. There's no indication that anything ever happened that I could prove. So I'm like, I'm stunned. I'm absolutely stunned. I was in shock. I walk out into the hallway. I go look at the other offices out there. The doctor's not in yet. The nurse isn't in yet. All those offices are closed and locked up. There was nothing that accounted for that crackling. Nothing. And I went into shock.
And especially the motion, the movement of it.
Yeah. It moved it circumvented my office. Went all around. So I was in total shock. I didn't see anybody that day. I closed the office. I was staring out the window. It was then that I fully realized that these things are entities.
Okay, I got
this isn't a hallucination. These things are entities, and they don't like me.
Well, the first thing I got to ask is, are you a man of faith? Were you a man of faith at the time, or was this one of those moments of conversion for you, or where the veil is pulled back and perhaps you didn't have a defined faith, but you just knew, okay, well, the world just got a little bit more complex. I mean, this had to have been something for you if you weren't already there.
Well, I wasn't a Bible thumper, that's for sure. I had some bad experiences being forced into church when I was in the Boy Scouts, and that really set me back like 10 years. But I was more spiritual. I would read all these spiritual books. I would read Carlos Castaneda. I would read
Miguel Ruiz. I had the Four Agreements myself, so I know Miguel Ruiz.
Yeah. I'd read stuff like Miguel Ruiz, especially in graduate school when it was so spiritually dry. I couldn't stand it. It was like I was shriveling up. I was always very spiritual, but I wasn't religious. I didn't follow a certain. I would go to different religious churches to see what I could learn, but I would never stick with them. I would always move on to another one to see if I could learn something else. So I was like a spiritual seeker. I believed in God. But as I got deeper and deeper into the dark side, it was like, okay, then if there's a dark side, there's a light side. So my positive spiritual stuff would get stronger too. I would also seek more on that side also. So it was like it was like I had a foot in both worlds. Okay. And that the regular world that I worked in, I couldn't talk to anybody about this. I couldn't even talk to my wife about this. I had to keep it to myself. There was nobody who would believe it. I could talk to schizophrenics about this stuff. They would understand it. but I couldn't talk to normal people. I couldn't talk to other psychologists. I couldn't even talk to my wife. She'd go, "Why are you digging through the head of these psychotic, criminally insane people? Why are you stop it?" And it would be like, yeah, but nothing. So I had to keep all this to myself. But it was at that point where I realized that they could affect physical reality because I was hearing the sound that this thing was making. I didn't know how it did it. I didn't know what it was. And it took me, I think, probably 3 months to call this guy back. I did not want to see him. I didn't want to see him.
So how did you start? Did you, at that point, when things get real, and like you said, we're talking about now physical manifestations, kinetic manifestations here. How did you, or did you, I don't know, start protecting yourself? Because when I think about that, and again, like I said, I've had so many years now of reading books from people like Gabriel Amorth, who was the Vatican's chief exorcist for decades, and anybody else in that line of work. We've had a number of nights just in the last few years about this subject, and of course, the whole point there is how dangerous work on a case that it involves spiritual possession, how dangerous that really is for somebody who doesn't have proper divine authority or is not shielded by faith to be able to make sure that this thing doesn't jump into you or something like that. Yes. So, I mean,
I think it'd be much more dangerous than somebody who has protecting themselves. I would not walk into that prison without praying for protection. Even in the emergency rooms, when I was working in the emergency rooms, I would not enter the emergency room without praying for protection. And in the emergency rooms, I got to where I could feel these things. I mean, it was like this icky electrical feeling. So, the schizophrenics couldn't lie to me when I was doing the evaluation. I'd ask them, "Were you hearing voices?" And they'd lie and they'd say, "No, I'm not hearing voices," because they didn't want to be admitted. They might have been dragged in there against their will. They didn't want to be trapped in there. And I would say, I could feel it. I could feel them. And I'd say, "Yes, you are. And this is how strong they are." And the guy'd go, "How do you know that? Or do you hear them too?" And so, "No, I can't hear them, but I could feel them." It's a very unique feeling. It's just like this icky electrical feeling. It's kind of similar to when you get the chills, but with an electrical feel to it. Right? But what happened with this guy after he left? It was like 2 months later or 3 months later. I called him back, and I was curious about what had happened in my office that day 3 months earlier. And he shows up and he's looking good. I thought he would be a mess. I thought he'd look depressed and beat up and, under the weather. And no, he looked good. He had plenty of energy. And I said, "Boy, you look good. You look a lot better than I expected." And he said, "Well, I've been doing what you told me to do. They haven't taken complete control of me, but I haven't completely got rid of them yet either." So he said it's more like a Mexican standoff. They can't go any further, but I haven't gotten rid of them either. So I said, "Well, that's good to hear." And I said, we did a little small talk, and I said, "Do you remember the last time you were in here?" And he said, "Yeah." And I said, "Did you hear that crackling that happened in the office when you were here?" And he goes, "Yeah." He said, "I heard it." He said, "But I'm surprised that you did," meaning me. And I said, "What the hell was that?" And he said, "That was them." And I said, "Them, the voices?" And he said, "Yeah, that was the voices." And that shook me up because I didn't think they could affect physical reality at that point. And when I heard this, that was physical reality. They were causing those vibrations of the atmosphere. They were affecting physical reality. So that took me back. It was like, okay, if they can do that, what else can they do? And how much danger am I in? And where is all this going? And I had no cognitive map of this thing, of this place. It was almost like I had opened the door to this other world, and I had stuck my foot in, and I was looking around, but I had no idea where it went or what was there or how dangerous it was or anything else. There was no cognitive map of this uncharted territory. So he said, well, those were the voices. And I asked him, I said, well, what in the dickens were they doing? And he said, they were trying to scare you off. And I said, well, they did a damn good job. And I asked him, I said, you looked really strange when you left my office that day. I said, what were the voices telling you as you walked out of my office that day? I said, he more or less dragged himself out. I mean, he shuffled out. It wasn't a normal gait. He just kind of shuffled out. I said, what were the voices telling you as you left my office? He said, they were telling me to go get a shank and stick it in your gut. And I was thinking, oh, he wouldn't do that. You know, I've been working with this guy for 6 months. He's gotten a lot better than what he was. You know, but he wouldn't do that. And I just out of curiosity, I asked him, I said, well, why didn't you do it? And he said, I couldn't find one and nobody would give me one. And I went, whoa.
Dear Lord.
So
that was yeah, so much for liking each other. That would have been completely overridden. It was just a lack of resources at the moment. Jeez. Okay, well, Jerry, I gotta ask you. And thankfully, we're arriving at this question with at least 10 minutes for you to really stretch out on it. And that is, at that moment when you know that it's you versus the abyss, and these are not, at least in these cases, like I said, I don't know how widespread this is, and you're one person with a hell of a lot of data and a lot of experience. And I'm sure there's a lot of debate going on in the several chat rooms right now. And whoever is watching years from now, watching this episode, there's debate going on as to how widespread this is. But you at that point with these experiences and you now having this new understanding of what you're dealing with and what you're up against, how does your treatment of the situation change? Have you had successfully treated patients once you came to these revelations? Because essentially you're talking about taking on the responsibility of an exorcist. And I just wonder how professionally your success rate changed after that.
It changed enough for me to realize that these things could be gotten rid of without medications, right? So one by one, these patients I was working with, okay, and it took a while because I didn't know what I know now, okay? There's a new energetic psychotherapy out there now that works better than I've ever seen in my life. I mean, it's very efficient, and it will treat, cases of schizophrenia that are from mild to moderate, and get rid of the voices. Okay, but back then I didn't know about this. It's called the MACE energy method. I've been using it now for maybe 3 years. It's the most effective psychotherapy and it's not a talk therapy. It's an energetic psychotherapy. But back then I didn't know about that stuff. Okay, what I knew was that the voices were not the patient. They didn't come from the patient. They were individual entities with their own minds. They were destructive. They were liars, and they ran these patterns. Okay, so I would get them to break up these patterns, and people would start getting better. So the more of these patterns they could break up, the better they got. What would happen? The voices would get lower. They wouldn't be as loud, and they wouldn't come as often. And then eventually they would leave. So time after time after time over the period of years, the patient would fully recover here, another one there, a few months later, another one there. Wasn't fast, but they were recovering and completely getting off their medications. So they would tell the psychiatrist, hey, I don't need these medications anymore. The voices are gone. And the psychiatrist would ask them, well, what happened? And they would tell the psychiatrist, well, I was working with Jerry and we got rid of him. Now, when that hit the chief psychologist, who was my boss, I thought they'd be happy about that. They weren't. They were pacing around like a couple of demons up there. Like, what's he doing? What's he doing? And I couldn't tell them what I was doing. I mean, there were times where I'd spend 4 hours with a psychiatric patient, a schizophrenic, asking them questions, talking with their voices, finding out, what they did. Where the rest of the psych staff, they 20 minutes and they were done. They didn't want to deal with them anymore. I was fascinated with what they were hearing, what they were telling me. And these guys were slowly, one by one, they were recovering. When that hit the chief psychologist, I was put under investigation. He would send out another stooge psychologist to go talk to these patients who'd recovered and ask them, well, what are you doing in the office? What's he doing in there with you? The patients knew, the prisoners were wise enough to know what they were doing. They wouldn't tell them. And that frustrated them no end. One guy said, he's helping us, not like you, asshole. And that really flamed him, So that psychologist, he had an MMPI on this one guy who was psychotic when he came into the prison, which MMPI is like the psychologist, that's their golden test. That's their, that's the height of their technology as far as testing. The guy came out with a positive psychotic profile, and this profile was valid. So this psychologist asked him, can I give you another MMPI? And the patient said, yeah, sure, you can do that. He took it. He came out as not psychotic any longer. And it flew in the face of that first valid test saying he was psychotic. So they saw objectively as they could get, that I was doing something that was helping these guys recover, and they didn't like it. It was like I got accused of experimenting with prisoners without the approval of the department. All right. And they couldn't find out what I was doing because nobody would tell them. Not one of those patients that had recovered would tell them anything. None of the ones I was working with would tell them anything. And they left me alone,
especially since pharmaceuticals was not involved in any of it.
Well, what happens is each guy that recovered, they didn't have to take those meds anymore. Those meds were expensive, and they're also destructive. Those meds, those antipsychotic drugs, they rot out the central nervous system. They actually shrink the patient's brain with long-term use. They cause permanent physiological damage, neurological damage. They found that out when they started doing autopsies with long-term psychiatric patients in state hospitals. When they did an autopsy, they saw that their brains were shrunken like walnuts. And, these guys who were the researchers who were doing those studies, they published it, and the psychiatric mafia and Big Pharma went nuts. They went, oh no, it's not our drugs. It's the schizophrenia doing this. The schizophrenia shrinking their brains. And the researchers went, yeah, we don't think so. So they started feeding those phenothiazine drugs to rats, monkeys, and mice, and their brains were shrinking also. So these drugs are doing permanent psychiatric neurological damage with long-term use. So not only are they not curing anything, they're making things worse. Here they are telling patients that this is the only cure there is.
Well, my last question for you for the night, Jerry, is: do you believe that the rate of these spiritual, these possessions, these obsessions, the torment? Do you think that the rate of this is increasing or intensifying? And if so, what is the main driver? Because I don't know. When you talk about this, I can't help but think of some large biblical plot, because you're talking about the motivations of a parasitic section of the spirit world. So you can't really blame the U.S. government for everything in this respect, but maybe, who knows? I don't know. Are portals open?
I think a lot of those suckers up there, you look like Schiff and Comey and all these characters up there, Pencil Neck.
Mm-hmm.
Those guys are possessed. I mean, I have no doubt. Those guys are possessed. I mean, they move up the ladder. Okay. but you look at what's happening in the United States right now. Over 50,000 people a year are killing themselves here in the U.S. A good majority of them are on antidepressant drugs and antipsychotic drugs. So you have more psychiatrists, you have more psychologists, you have more psychiatric nurses, you have more psychiatric drugs available right now than in the entire history of mankind, and the population is getting worse. Mental illness is increasing constantly, year after year after year. You know, and these guys are making billions of dollars not curing anything, just treating symptoms. Yeah, there's veterans are killing themselves at an astounding rate.
Well, it doesn't matter what the source of the trauma is. It's as you said earlier on in the conversation, the methods of treating is all the same, and it doesn't seem to really have it all leads to the same dead end. And so I would love to have you back on again, because there's so many more things to talk about. I mean, there are because when you start discussing the little peeks behind the curtain that you got into the spirit world and how it manifests and how it works through the living to be able to stake its claim in some kind of a material way in our world, otherwise just being disembodied and somewhere else, that opens up so many more questions about things that have happened in the past, historically, in war zones, on a psychological level, paranormal, the paranormal activity, things like that. But with your published work, in closing, can you let people know an amazing journey into the psychotic mind, breaking the spell? There it is, right there. So this is your story, and also your prescriptions going forward into the future.
Well, this is a story of how we found out that these things were entities. Now, Sherry Sweeney, my co-author, when she was a young woman, she was schizophrenic also. You know, she fought those voices for years, for decades. She came up with and she was the first one I was able to talk to about these voices. So she was working on prison reform. I was working on prison reform, and she had one of the biggest prison reform websites in the United States. So I hooked up with her, and I would help her attack the Alabama system, because I couldn't attack my own system because they'd fire me. So I would advise her as like, okay, if you tell them this is how they're going to react. This is what they're going to do when you do this. This is what they're going to do when you do that. This is how they think. This is how they function. That kind of stuff. So I was like the whistleblower, for her. She had a relative that she was trying to get out of that prison who had been framed. And then one day I started talking about the voices, and she goes, "I know all about the voices." I said, what do you mean? Now, this was 10 years later. Okay, 10 years after I had met her. That's how much there is of a stigma on psychiatry, on schizophrenia. And I didn't believe it, because she's one of the most spiritual people I've ever met. And so I started slamming her with questions that only somebody hearing voices would be able to answer. And one after another was like, bam, 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 bam. She had the answers. And I was like, holy cow. So I had somebody I could finally talk to who understood what was going on and had been there. So although I've seen hundreds of schizophrenics and was working with hundreds of them, she had her own personal story, and I would run everything by her and say, what do you think of this? What do you think of that? What do you think is going on here? So we just kind of became a team. And then finally we said, we got to let the world know about this. This has got to get out. We can't just keep this to ourselves. And she goes, yeah, I agree. We need to let the world know about this. So we took us 2 years to write this book, and it's out there.
It's on Amazon, right? I found it on Amazon before.
It's on Amazon, or you can order it through my website at jerrymarzinsky.com, or Engineering Sanity website. Um, you can go, yeah, there it is.
Yeah.
You can get it there. You can also go down the videos down there, and you can watch a number of videos that I've done with people who were schizophrenic and told their stories, what it was like to be schizophrenic. Um,
Well, there's a lot here, Jerry, and like I said before, I think it would be wonderful to have you back on the show. And I appreciate all the time you gave us tonight. It's illuminating, and wow, I still have notes I haven't gotten to, so that'll be the basis for episode 2. If you would accept an invitation back, and I hope you had a good time.
Yeah, I'd be glad to. But
Well,
one more thing I want to say, you go to my website at jerrymarzinski.com, you go to articles, and there is a program there that Sherry wrote. It's called That's a Lie program. Okay. It's
right
in
here.
there somewhere. Yeah, That's a Lie program. Print that out. Those of you who are having trouble with the voices, print that out. It's a free program. It will weaken the voices if you use it consistently. In some cases, it will get rid of them. Okay. Print that out, put it to work consistently. 23rd Psalm. The voices hate the 23rd Psalm. Okay. And at my website at jerrymarzinski.com, there's a write-up on this new energetic psychotherapy that has been working with clearing a number of people of schizophrenia. I mean, getting rid of the voices. It doesn't work with all of them, but it works with more than any other therapies that I've ever seen.
Well, I hope that people start investigating and taking a look, and it's thank you for the illuminating evening, Jerry. It's been wonderful to meet you.
All right.
Okay.
And
Jerry
the other
Marzinski.
thing, last thing, these voices hit everybody. They don't just hit schizophrenics. You might be walking down the sidewalk and you get this horrible thought, spit on the guy in front of you, or knock this guy out of the way, or you're standing on the bridge and you get a thought that, I wonder what it'd be like to jump over. They hit us all.
I'm glad you said that, because as we were talking tonight, I said, well, I've got some reflecting to do. You don't know, everybody has inner monologue, and sometimes you get into just, bad habits of being too hard on yourself, one thing or another. But then there's other times where the voice just seems a little bit too foreign. And I don't know. It's something to consider. And I have some things I want to do in the short ending that I'm about to embark on right now. But you've set the table for so many future conversations, Jerry. I wish I had a 3.5 hour show tonight, because I know that the calls would be absolutely incredible, but that's just not what we're dealing with. Thank you for everything, and we will have you back on soon.
Okay. And one last thing. This voice you hear in your head, telling you all this stuff, ask yourself, who's listening to that voice?
It would just be you, no?
That would be the real you.
Yeah.
What you're hearing, that diatribe you hear running through your head, isn't you. You're the one who's listening to it. The real you is the one who's listening to it. All this other stuff is coming in from other spiritual places, either negative places or positive places. It's like a radio. You're picking up a certain frequency of thought. Schizophrenics have a very low frequency. Very religious, spiritual people have a much higher frequency. You pick up, like you said, your mind is like a radio. It picks up the frequency you're tuned to. If you've been abused, you've been sexually abused, you've been traumatized, you're working at a very low frequency. And the therapy I was talking about will erase those traumas. I mean, it'll get rid of them in an hour. The worst traumas available, they'd be gone in 1 hour. They're gone. You don't feel them anymore. And there's a write-up on that on my website at jerrymarzinski.com.
All right, and you have you have contact information on there as well, in case anybody had any questions or concerns or anything.
Yeah, there's contact information, but you can write me at Jerry Marzinski, JMARZ1 at outlook.com.
JMARZ1 at outlook.com. Okay. Well, Jerry, again, thank you so much.
Okay, I'll let you go this time.
And I'm looking forward to the next time. It'll be wonderful, and it'll just be an appendage of this. So have a great weekend, and we will talk soon. Thank you, sir.
Okay, send me a link when you have one.
Oh, I will. Take care. Everybody, go and check out jerrymarzinski.com and go check out his book, especially now that you know how it was compiled. Did you think about that at all? The sometimes the voice, the dialogue. How much of it are you controlling? Especially if you're in the setting that you're in, the location that you're in, wherever you're going. I had something, and I'm going to do this in I have to get to our super chats because I have to start extra innings. And in extra innings, everybody, I had to pull this aside. I have a quote here, a very famous one from Rudolf Steiner from 1907. And we'll talk about that in extra innings tonight. You'll have some time to go over to pilled.net. We're going to start as soon as the end credits roll up. We're going to go over there for another maybe 25 minutes or half hour or so. And I think that this is going to be a very, very stimulating way to end the night. But let's go to our super chats because, as I said, what's on the line tonight is a lump of silver, and I have another ounce of silver I'm going to give away on Monday night. Is it Monday or Tuesday? We'll see. I like to spread those out. Okay, so let's see here. First one up is Nicole. And Nicole said, great guest. I love the show, Frank. Thank you so much, Nicole. It's good to have you. It really is. Mark Bisson says, great guest and message. I'm a big fan of John Rappaport and Dr. Peter Breggin, and this needs to reach the masses. Thanks for sharing this on your channel. Well, thank you, Mark. This is the kind of stuff that I really hunger for. It's fascinating. It's a great topic, and if we had a little bit of time to take calls right now, I'd be jammed up. I'm sure I would be. But let's see here. Steve Robinson says, I'd like Jerry's interviews on VHS, please. Okay, Steve. You can send $5 personal check, to the P.O. box on the sponsor page on quitefrankly.tv. Also become a sponsor if you want to see Frank and the nightly production continue and only dig deeper and find the stuff and remain independent. Please, by all means, a little goes a very, very long way. Become a sponsor of the show. Steve Robinson, thank you. John Volt says, Frank, did you hear that Channel 5 got a $1 billion lawsuit from Melania Trump for talking to Hunter Biden about how Epstein introduced her to Trump? No, I did not. But I hope they pay every dollar. Steve Ellis says, yo, Frank, what's going on, Steve? Let me put Steve in here. I'm putting down names so that we can do the running. Jay Britt says, the voices don't like the 23rd and 91st Psalms. Very interesting, isn't it? I was reading it while he was talking, too. I said, my, oh, my. My, oh, my. You would think that you would run right to the Bible. You would run right into the arms of it when you see. I mean, I don't know if any other sacred book or religious text has that kind of an effect on these entities, but the Bible seems to never miss. Jay Britz, thank you. ST says, Western medicine and psychiatry are a business, all about the money, simple as that. Thank you, ST. I have you down already. Running on empty. I have them down as well, too. Says, most excellent guest, Frank, thank you. And ST says, Jerry is spot on. Started out as a psych RN, all my years nursing, med, surgery, etc. Nothing but pill pushers, former RN, due to the fact. Revelation 18:23. Road Trip is in here as well. Great show last night. Picked up some more knowledge on health. This show is valuable and the guests are amazing. Well, Road Trip, like I said, thank you. Thank you for supporting the show. It means a lot. And I'm prepping for another 20 years of greatness. Let's do 20 years on a whole new level. We have some plateaus to break out of, and with your help, I know that it's going to be a cinch. Paulina Tomzak says, riddle me this. Came home this evening, found a dead wild canary on my balcony. What the hell? I don't know what the hell that's about. Jeez. A canary. Well, I mean, that's somebody's pet, no? Gotta be. And then Shots, he says, enjoy your summer Friday. Oh, and Jay Britt says, silver. But I have Jay Britz in there as already. Yes, you're in it for the silver, my friends. Yes, you are. All right. Summer Friday. At some point I'll probably go live from here from my phone. Jay Gulanello will be here at some point. We're gonna be hanging pictures. There's things in here that are gonna be worked around and cleaned down, scrubbing things down out there. It's just going to be party prep and not only that, but beyond September. It's just a new creative mindset for everything that's going on in this facility. I was even talking to Anthony about that as well. So we need a lot more overlap in 2026, my friend. It has been 20 years, and it's time. Everything grows up. Jay Semo says, in my time, the clinical pharma I naively worked at on the analysis of the antidepressant side effects included suicidal ideation. Statistics can be dangerous but lucrative tool. Excellent show. Jay Semo in the running for some silver as well, on top of a great contribution. We have another over here too. I remember seeing Tommy Jekyll says a bodacious show, Frank and Jerry. Into It Are You says great show. So let me put Into It Are You and Tommy Jekyll. All right. Real quick, over on Pilled, see the what we have going on over there, and then we'll be ending. All right. Let's see. Oh, Joe Elaine, Big Chief says, hi ho, silver away. Sign me up to win, baby. There you go. Big Chief. Safety Net says, I'm so sorry, but I do not hate this show. I love it. Well, Safety, thank you. Captain Flint says, need to get back to giving nerds swirlies when they get creepy. Artificial wombs, dorks. Captain Flint, you know what the hell Aurora did to me the other night? She came up from my mother's, and she said, come here, Dad. And I said, what? She said, no, come here. And I bent down there, and she threw an arm right over my head, and she gave me a noogie. She went, I said, are you giving me a noogie? Who the hell taught you that? It was my mother. So she's getting a proper education, okay? Not a state of New York recommended education, which is more like medication. She's getting an education. Okay, let's see here. Proper. Captain Flint, thank you. Vesper says, hand over the silver, matey. Why say? There you go. Vesper is in there. Twisted Sticks, a 12-month silver tier subscription. Thank you, Twisted. For the next year, they are going to be getting all of the perks of sponsorship with Quite Frankly that you get on any of the places on quitefrankly.tv/sponsor. The book clubs, the Sunday streams, you name it. Thank you, Twisted Six. And let's see here. Red says, thanks for all the health information. It's a health show. For years. I mean, it's been a big part of it. It always has. But now I got somebody to bounce it all off of. Thank you, Vesper. What do you think Malachi Martin would say about tonight's topic? I would say Malachi Martin, I've heard him talk specifically about all of the psychiatrists that he knew, many of who have left their practices behind, who were atheists that turned into ardent Christians, or if they didn't turn into Christians, they at least never, maybe they were agnostic. They couldn't explain how the spiritual world, the hierarchy of it all is set up, but they knew at that point that this was not all there was. But I remember him saying on Coast to Coast a couple of times of just psychiatrists giving up their practice, saying, what am I doing? Am I really making an impact? And that was like back in 1997, Malachi Martin said that in New York City, where he was stationed, where he was hanging out, writing his books and doing his thing. He said that there had at that point been like a 700, 800% increase in possession. And he talked very frankly about people who are perfectly possessed. Adam Schiff's, all of them, perfectly possessed people. They have given themselves over to something and they are totally fine with the trade-off. Rev says, I have not really known schizos myself except an aunt's brother growing up who insisted Charles Bronson had stolen his movie scripts. Anyway, happy Friday, Franklies. Hopefully everyone is having a wonderful weekend. Yeah, listen, I'm interested to see the kind of feedback that comes back because I'm not a broad stroke kind of guy. When I hear that there is a spiritual element to it, I you don't have to sell me on that very hard. I naturally assume that there is a significant number of stuff that is being treated with pharmaceuticals and a whole lot of secular religious approach that actually is misdiagnosed spiritual malady. I just naturally assume that. But it's hard for me to say that everybody who is schizophrenic and hears voices is dealing with a spiritual invasion. It's just hard for me to take that leap. If you told me 95%, I'd say, okay. If you told me 95%, I would say, okay. I can't go to 100 just because for real? We'll see. I'm sure there's more conversations on this coming. Sentinel says, I believe Jerry's observations. I know someone whose inner dialogue told them that if they would just stab themselves in the gut, the pain would go away day after day. She got invited to church one day, and the pastor spoke that night that Jesus died to heal your mind and body and spirit and forgive sins. She became a Christian, and that night those experiences went away. Joe Elaine, thank you. Winston Dave, interesting, great talk. Let me put Winston in there. Good. The Sentinel again says, I wonder if Jerry had reviewed any of the University of Penn's resiliency study university put together for the U.S. Army. It teaches strategies to battle against unproductive negative thoughts. Cave Toad says, great show tonight, Frank. Good fun, great convos over there on pilled.net. I'll be right over there. Don't go anywhere. Sentinel again, for great escape but on topic, watch Harvey with Jim Stewart. Cave Toad again, if you get a horrible thought, rebuke it immediately. The Holy Spirit will help and pass the message along. Do it always. 123 SKG, thank you. Let me get you in there. 123 SKG. Amethyst Cat, fantastic guest, Frank. Thank you. And Lynn says, fantastic guest. I thank you again. Silly Boar, great guest and show, Frank. I appreciate you guys. All right. Well, listen, we have a lot more to do. Well, not a lot more to do. We're going to have some fun. Unscripted, I'm just going to be reading the general chat. I want to read you something that I think is very germane to tonight's subject. That is all going to be on Quite Frankly. You can go to quitefrankly.tv, but the real link is Pilled. If you go to pilled.net, we are live. There, that's my voice right there. I'm going to take that. I'm going to put it into the chat room. Boom, boom. I put it in there twice. And you go over there. As soon as the end credits roll up, we're just going to be doing chill. And I'm going to be reading the general chat. We're usually showing you exclusive stuff from like bygone years, things you've never seen from the old studio and everything like that. Home videos, extended time with featured guests in studio, whatever the hell it is. It's a lot of fun. Great to wind down and really cast off into the night. We went a little bit over 9 o'clock. Doesn't matter. We'll get a good 25 minutes to a half hour in. Head over there. But first, the winner of the silver. And it goes to Red or Reed. REDE7. REDE7. Wherever you are, my friend, whoever you are, I think that's the first time I ever read them in a super chat. REDE7. Email frank@quitefrankly.tv so I can get your mailing information over to Tony at quitefrankly.gold. That is our great friends over there at Wise Wolf Gold and Silver. Many of you are getting small allotments of silver and gold every month in their wolf pack, and that is a very smart way. If you do a little bit of crypto, make sure you're stacking a little bit of silver as well. It's physical, it's real world shit. It survives all catastrophes. Go ahead, get over there at quitefrankly.gold and tell Tony Arterburn that Frank said hello. All right? Buy silver for all of your friends and family for stocking stuffers this holiday season. All right, that's all. Thank you to Jerry Marzinsky. We'll be back on Monday, but remember, tomorrow night, 7 o'clock, go to the Rumble, and you're going to get a special treat from last weekend. If you haven't seen it, and many of you haven't, you're going to enjoy it. So pack your hookahs and have a good night. I'll see you on the other side.
I'll catch you on the flip side.
Quite Frankly is filmed before a live studio audience, and now our super chatters, starting with Nicole, Mark Bisson, Steve Robinson, John Volts, Steve Ellis, Jay Britz, ST, Running on Empty, Road Trip, Paulina, Tom Zach, Shotzi, Jay Britz, to our wonderful Rumble Ranters and our Gold Pillars. I will be heading over to Pilled right now. If you don't know, well, where's the Pilled link? Okay, well, if it's a last second thing, go to quitefrankly.tv, and Pilled is embedded right in the center of the Quite Frankly official headquarters. So go to quitefrankly.tv or the Pilled chat, the link I just put out there, and I'll see you in a moment.